to the world that most of you weren't here to get your head around. But openness to the world is the unique freedom of man to inquire and to move beyond every regulation of his existence. So this became a theological anthropology that a person, because they are a person with higher faculties, with higher abilities to reason, with higher abilities to manipulate our environment, that what that did is it is the unique freedom of a man to inquire and to move beyond every regulation of his existence. And Pannenberg, who puts forth this idea, um, leaves nothing out of that. So, an openness to the world means that we can do anything that we want, okay? And because we're able to do it, it's that thing from Jurassic Park. Just because we can do a thing doesn't mean that we should do a thing. But openness to the world says that we more than likely should do a thing. And so we have what we have today in a large sense, where people are convinced that they can have impact and control over everything, even their own biology, and we see all of this, and we look at that and we think that's craziness, but for some people, this is the natural end to their abilities, that we have the ability to do this, and I can be free in it, so I'm going to do it. The other problem with that is that when we behave that way, when we exercise freedom in that way, we find that there's never enough. And that's part of our world today, right? There's people that they never can get enough. And so they just keep going and going and going. Well, Penneberg says that what that creates is this infinite dependency, because if you're never able to satisfy, then you're dependent on something or someone who will be able to satisfy.
Thus, anxiety and stress.
Yeah, yes, anxiety and stress and aloneness. Because if you're doing these things ultimately individually free, you can pursue and do all of those things and alienate yourself completely from everyone else. So you really do wind up a man or woman on an island all by yourself with everything you've concocted you to believe and everything that you need to believe it. That's a miserable state of affairs. That's finding no meaning in life outside of your own self. And that seems to be intriguing to a lot of people these days. Now, I'm going to run a little bit of a tangent here because what artificial intelligence does for that is carry it a bit further down the road, okay? So you've reached your end, but artificial intelligence hasn't. So you begin to lean on it, okay? And so now you begin, not only have you washed the foundation out from under what would be considered relatable human life with everyone else. It's an establish of your identity based upon what everyone would seem to agree is a human being. You've exhausted all of that and found no satisfaction, so you move beyond that with the help of a machine that can think about your life even in ways that you may not be able to, and you pursue that. So we're able to extend this beyond. Okay, so what does any of that have to do with theology? Okay, and I would think some of that might be obvious. If theology is man's question and word about God, and this is where we find ourselves, we still haven't eliminated the question about God. Even an atheist has to address the question about God. There's no way around it. And so here we are. So openness to the world and what we often call general revelation. Okay, so there's two types of revelation that we lean upon as Christian believers, and really in particular um, evangelical believers, and that is general revelation and then specific or special revelation. All right. So we're going to look at both of those things more general at this point so that we can begin to get a grasp of what that means both to us as believers and where we establish it biblically. And then for people who God's not even in on their radar screen, and yet is he? Because there's this general revelation of who he is, which we refer to often. If you wanted to look, it's just like me. I forgot everything. I'm already on sabbatical and doesn't know it. I left my Bible too. And now I'm using my phone, and yeah, let me have that one. You've probably read these passages in Psalm 19. I'm going to look that one up. If somebody would, Romans 1:18. But Psalms 19.
We're all sitting here going, we don't have our Bibles.
I know. We all came to church without our Bible. Psalm 19 says this: the heavens declare the glory of God, and the expanse proclaims the work of his hands. Day after day they pour out speech. Night after night they communicate knowledge. There is no speech, there are no words, their voice is not heard. Their message has gone out to the whole earth, and their words to the end of the world. In the heavens he has pitched his tent for the sun. So he gets into this anthropomorphic thing. So what is it describing? If you want to know who God is, just look to the heavens. Okay. So we've held passages like that. That's just an example of the general revelation of God. How can you look into the stars and not know there's a God? Well, an astronomer could say, well, I can tell you 1,000 ways, or I can look at the stars and tell you there's no God. But that's been the idea of general revelation biblically. And then in Romans, man, I passed these Bibles out at the jail. I never realized how small the print actually is. So I have to use it.
Glasses help.
Yeah. It says here, for God's wrath is revealed from heaven against all godlessness and unrighteousness of people who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. Since what can be known about God is evidence among them because God has shown it to them. I'm going to read this whole thing, I guess. For his invisible attributes, that is, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen since the creation of the world, being understood through what he has made. As a result, people are without excuse. I'm just going to stop there because that's where we usually stop. That's Romans 1, beginning with verse 18. So what Paul is saying there is that even in a logical way, when you approach the revelation of God through nature, there's a logic about nature that tells us that there's God. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like he hits on this intelligent design thing that comes much later in the Middle Ages with Thomas Aquinas and others. So we use these passages to say that everyone's dead in their sin because no one is without the knowledge of God. It's you can see it everywhere. Okay. The problem is they don't have a heart and a mind to see it. So therein lies the value of it, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. But that gives you an idea of the biblical background. This is where we get our idea of general revelation. Also, general it's communicated through nature, but finally, general revelation is noetic rather than salvific. That means it is intended to mediate a general knowledge of God, our Creator. So you're not saved by this knowledge. You just have knowledge. Okay. And from an evangelical point of view, this is often used as an argument when people say, there is no God, and you say, well, there is a God. You can see him in the heavens. You can see his design in nature and all these things. It doesn't really hold up very well for people who are determined not to believe.
They're going to tell you they know the science.
Yeah. The other thing that is about general revelation is that there is a way to know God logically. Now we went through all the logical arguments earlier on, but there is a logic to come on in, buddy.
Amen, amen. Fresh from the levee. Amen. Amen. Hey, y'all.
There's a logic about us that we are able to examine and say that this is more than just knowledge that I have attained. There's a logical process of life that exists in me, or that I can see in others. Maybe it doesn't exist in me, but I can experience in others, and it all begins to make sense. That's another way that general revelation may come to be. So I just wanted to touch on that. The place of general revelation in theological history. This is what we have to stand on. The idea of knowing God generally rather than specifically has been a part of our theology, especially because we're standing on 2,000 years of work, rather than when some of these guys they were trying to make sense of this for the very first time. So they did the best with what they had. And so we see that as we move forward in history, that these things change, because even our understanding of God changes, because our appreciation and understanding of Christ changes through experience, through the experience of history, and our understanding of God's intervention and interaction with history. All of these things naturally create change in the way that we approach and view things. But that's from our point of view. I would in no way ever suggest that God is changing in that, but our point of view is often under reconstruction. So one way, and under the heading, the place for general revelation in theological history, it says, under number one, a first group of thinkers wholeheartedly embrace the concept of general revelation. They derive this from the aspect of the divine self-closure. It's a natural theology, a body of truth concerning God available to all persons. General revelation is included in that, okay? Thomas Aquinas was the one that pinned it and nailed it down. If you go down and look kind of in the middle of that section at the bottom of the paragraph, it says, by looking at creation, human reason is able to discover a body of propositional statements, yet not completely valid, about the nature of God. So you can put together a postulated argument for God simply by observing the world. And this is what Aquinas did. And for the longest time, everybody was happy with that. It just fit everybody's shoe, everybody's foot worked perfectly. Human reason yields a body of truth to which the individual gives assent, because this truth is demonstrated by argumentation, meaning that you can see how God is working, and you can build an argument to prove that God is there. Okay. Not only is he there in the aspect of general creation, but you can begin to build some logical arguments about how God is working individually. Okay. The second is the reaction to that medieval authority in the Reformation formed the foundation for a second attitude toward the concept of general revelation. The Reformers accepted general revelation but rejected natural theology. What do I mean by that? Or what does Grinch mean by that? They agreed with the scholastics that God discloses himself in creation and that this revelation is available to all, but the Reformers set forth the bold thesis that sinful humankind is not able to know God through this general revelation, meaning that the image of God is so marred that we can stare God in the face and not see him. That's what the Reformers came across with. So when you hear Calvinistic arguments about the total deprivation of man, that's what they're talking about, is that you can show them in nature, but they're so depraved, their minds are so depraved that they're never going to see it. So the question becomes, what value is it? if it's not of value to help a person know God in their sinfulness, then really does it have a place at all? That question has yet to be answered. They're still asking that question.
I
Yes.
have a question. We are all sinful. So if some of us can recognize God, why cannot others recognize?
That's a good question. That's been a question for a long time. Jesus seems to say, well, God said it to Isaiah first, that you're going to preach, but they're not going to hear you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the way that the Bible describes that most often is that their hearts are hard. So what does that mean? Well, for me, that means the heart is determined to be hard because the spirit cannot do its work. Okay. So just as there are degrees of faith and understanding that different people reach. Some people reach a certain point where they're satisfied at that and they never go further. Okay. But come on in. But also, I think that works in the same way in the opposite. I think that there are some folks that are just so determined in their own identity and in their own sinfulness that they're not going to let go. They have the hardest of hearts. Okay. So I'm trying to think of historical examples, and I always think of the big ones like Joseph Stalin. I mean, he had to be one of the most
Adolf
simple,
Hitler.
evil people. Adolf Hitler,
Yeah.
Idi Amin, the list goes. Pol Pot. All of those are from my childhood days, really, or previously. But it's the kind of evil that
Even modern day, though, how when a person can walk in with a classroom of first graders,
Yeah,
how hard
same
and
thing.
evil is that heart if you can shoot and blow
Yeah.
away little first graders?
yeah.
Yeah.
And so today we have all kind of psychiatric answers for those things, sociological and psychological answers for this. That there's sociopathic, or they're psychopathic, or there's this, that, and the other going on, or they had a bad childhood, and all these various things. But we find ourselves digging a deeper hole where those things may be valid, but they don't bring you out of the problem like this does. Does that make sense?
Yeah. We know the answer, but they keep
Yeah,
putting all those titles on the problem.
And they can't fix it.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. So because we are, I'm read it like it. According to the reformers, two factors, both related to human sin, account for the imperceptibility of general revelation. Our sin has obscured the revelation of God. Now we can see where that's possible, where sinfulness can obscure the revelation of God. So let's just take it for a moment. Let's just take any revelation of God. If you've been damaged by those who claim to know God and follow him to the point to where you don't want to ever see God on account of their sinfulness, then what is that doing? That's feeding your own sinfulness. It's a different kind, and it may operate at a different level in life, but it's the same. Okay? Or you just have such a hatred for the idea that there's a power bigger than you. Not going to surrender to a power bigger than me. And that's the ultimate in sin. And so we obfuscate all of that as best that we can so that we don't have to face it and deal with it. So that was one problem. Our sin obscures. In addition, we are unable to perceive the revelation of nature because our sin has blinded us to the truth present in creation. So we're talking about general revelation in creation. There are those that we've spoken of, and not to say that all scientists or all astronomers or all those people are resistant to or non-believers, but there are those who use those sciences to be able to say there's nothing in that operation of nature that declares to me God. It declares to me the laws of physics or the laws of this or the laws of that. And and so they have a God, in a sense. They're devoted to their knowledge of science and depending upon that and finding meaning and purpose in that. Because ultimately, as we move through this, we're going to see that what is the most important aspect of any of this? And it's knowing who we are and our purpose. And where does that come from in science? Where does that come from in these other things, that exist? Let's move on. And I'm on 136 in the paperback. Number 3, the Enlightenment era, a third and quite opposite attitude toward general revelation emerged during the Enlightenment. Enlightenment theologians elevated reason to a position even higher than that accorded by the human power by Aquinas. They looked to reason and nature as the final arbiters of truth, so you can know all truth through reason and observing nature. Okay? Certain theologians concluded that general revelation or the self-disclosure of the Supreme Being in the laws of nature was primary. How would you know God? Through the laws of nature. Okay? Special revelation, if at all valid, was true insofar as it constituted a reinstatement of the truths available to human reason through general revelation. So if you felt as though you had received a special revelation from God, those in the Enlightenment era would say that you have just logically concluded that this is the revelation of God. Nothing's, when we say special, we're speaking of something that would be supernatural. And so that would be totally rejected. What you believe to be supernatural is really can be stated differently with logic, and it would be much more reliable. That's what the Enlightenment theologian would say. Okay. The Enlightenment's optimistic appraisal of the human ability to know God, whereas opposed to the era before, where we were so lost in our sinfulness there was no way to know God. Okay, so you see the difference just in a few hundred years. The Enlightenment's optimistic appraisal of our human ability to know God through reason formed the context for the agenda of the 19th century liberalism. So in the 19th century, we find theological liberalism that is able to say that our understanding of God is totally wrapped up in our abilities. Okay. Now we're going to move through some things, but we're going to find out that we're kind of right back here in a lot of ways. We are so enamored with our own abilities now, and we've been given more tools to work with, so to speak, that we're closer to being able to establish our own created self-identity than we've ever been able to, and yet have no meaning and purpose in life at all. And so we're going to Grants addresses that way ahead of our time, which it's been coming for a long time, if you had eyes to see, I guess. The 20th century begins, and there's a fourth attitude, that questioning of general revelation as a source of knowledge of God. Karl Barth, radical attack on natural theology, quickly became the most definitive modern critique of the concept. I have to offer a disclaimer here. I think Karl Barth was the seminal theologian of the 20th century. Natural theology has its place, and maybe it doesn't have its place, but Barth said, because of what I'm about to read to you, and it's in the book here. Barth's response arose in part from his understanding of the idea of revelation itself. Okay, what is revelation? Is it a static thing that we can go over and point to and identify and learn from? Barth says no. He says, according to Barth, revelation is not something which is. It is not a body of truth waiting to be discovered, nor is it something out there to which an individual comes. Rather, in Barth's understanding, revelation is a divine activity, God disclosing himself. So I liken it to this. There's a book that you want to read, and it contains everything about your life. And all you have to do is go in there and get the book. read it, and you'll know everything that you need to know about your life. Only you walk through the door of the bookstore, and lo and behold, the author that wrote the book is there. So now, which would you rather have? Would you rather have the book that's full of information, or would you rather meet the guy that actually wrote it? Which conversation do you want to have? The one that you have to discover on your own, or the conversation you might have with the person that read it, that could actually portray it in a way that is all yours? This is the way I see Bart's understanding of Revelation. That we don't have to go discover something, we can know the something. And that something is not a something, it's a person. Okay? Anyway, that's the way it helps me, because I would definitely want the second. I can't imagine.
But don't we have that in the Word of God?
We do.
Yeah,
That's
is,
Bart's.
Yeah, that is our revelation.
Yeah.
That is the revelation.
That's right.
He's already given it to us.
So out of that one thing, Bart writes church dogmatics, and it's a set of books this long on the shelf. It's amazing because.
Well, you brought that out this morning. It's right there in Acts. This is what the church is supposed to be. It's written. That's right.
That's right. And we constantly are scratching at the surface of it all, because it just takes your life. It takes your whole life to do it. And that's the one thing that I didn't mention directly this morning, but these people were in it for life.
The
Every
chief
day,
purpose is to
house to
glorify
house.
God.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to glorify Him in your life, then you're digging and searching and searching.
With a joyful and sincere heart. I mean, you get the best of it all. Anyway, it's divine activity. Revelation is divine activity. So if it is divine activity, we have to be in an encounter with the divine. Okay? Special revelation is, placing Bart's view in the context of the distinction between general and special revelation yields the conclusion that for him, only special revelation is valid, which is exactly what we're talking about. According to Bart, what matters is our being confronted with the Word of God, which is what you were just saying, Carita, which is Christ. So there's no escape. If you're pursuing any meaning in your life, then according to Bart's theology, the only revelation that you're ever going to appreciate is the special one, because it is a divine revelation, and it is for you, because it is in this Word, and this Word is Christ.
It also allows you to appreciate the general revelation better, more.
I think we're certainly able to view it in ways that we may not have before. Yeah. So it is a higher appreciation. Yeah. And so, but we're about to get into this whole thing of creation and Adam and Eve and evolution and, all of these things that the Bible leaves unanswered, that science seems to answer. So we have to decide what we're going to do with all of that, because this all involves who we are in God, not created by God. We are in God, which is the point. And so we're going to examine those things very closely. We're going to slow down even more. I feel like I'm moving like a turtle right now. More recently, a fifth approach of the blending of general and special revelation has emerged. Salvation history, the idea that God discloses himself through his activity in history. On the basis of the thesis that God's self-disclosure is found in history as a whole, the contemporary German theologian Wolfhart Pannenberg rejects as invalid any division of truth into general and specific. In the 20th century, you can't escape one without having both, which is exactly what you were just saying, young lady. Pannenberg argues that there is but one self-disclosure of God. This revelation is general in that as history, it is public. It is available to all who would discover the revelation present in the human story at the same time. This one revelation is special. It is the disclosure of God's saving activity. So it is general in what? God is active in history. Okay? You've seen the word history hyphenated. His story, so God is active in history, but also it is specific in the sense that what? His actions are salvific, and that is for the individual. Okay? So what Pannenberg says is your experience with God is a part of history. Okay? To broaden it out further, and you've heard me say this, that how God is interacting in your life and what is accomplished through that has cosmic effects. Okay? So we think of that and we think, ooh, cosmic effect. That's what we think of. But that's not the way that the term is used theologically. What we're talking about is that what God does in your life has an effect beyond our own understanding, both in heaven and in earth. And Pannenberg says this is a part of the general revelation of God because it is beyond you. It extends so that it becomes a part of everything that God is working in human history. Does that make sense? Okay, so this cosmic idea, you can simplify it. We could really get down to some simplistic ways of looking at it. So Billy Graham evangelized
The world.
millions of people. Okay, but who evangelized Billy Graham? And who evangelized that person? So we see a ripple effect of things that happen in the universe, and then all at once there may be an explosion that occurs because of the one thing that God has done generationally removed maybe 4 or 5 times, but this is all the working of God. Okay, so if we are wise, we look for that revelation of God in all of it. Now that's a simple way. That's a simple illustration. And we're thinking, well, my life never has that kind of meaning. Okay. Well, have you ever read the story about the thief on the cross next to Jesus?
We don't even know his name.
I bet he went to that cross, man, I've wasted my life. Here I am. I'm going to die a slow, agonizing death. And if it hadn't been for Jesus, they would have died a slow, agonizing death. Okay? But for 2,000 years, people have read his story and it's changed their life. It's established a truth and a theological understanding of salvation and baptism and all these other things that happen. Okay? Was that an accident?
No.
And so the answer is no. This is God's revelation of himself at work in ways that we would not always look for, but are there. So for Pannenberg, it's kind of like the pictures that you have that you can't see until you focus on them just right, and then everything starts popping out at you.
Yeah,
I used to have a whole book of those. I could waste my life looking at those.
I was a man reading about the Sunday paper, so I could do that.
Yeah. Same kind of way, when we know how to look, we see the panorama of God at work. And so, and I kind of include it into my thinking with Bart because I like the idea of tearing down those distinctions because we get tied up in the distinctions. Oh, well, this has got to be a way. It's got to be this way. You're in this camp if you think of it this way, and you're in this camp if you think of it that way. And Pannenberg says, no, there's only one revelation, and you can see it everywhere if you just open your eyes. So, and what it also does is that people that don't believe, we all share the same history. Okay, so in that you still have hard questions to answer, like World War I and World War II, and some other terrible things that have happened in the world, and how is God working in those things. But if you were here before, we've answered a lot of those questions about how God is. There's very often in a fallen world he has to deal with fallen things in order to bring about something that is not fallen, that is good, and so we have to learn how to see and hear. All right, the theological importance of general revelation. We're going to look at that quickly. Revelation in the human person. God has disclosed himself within the structure of the human person. What does that mean? Well, we're going to get to it later in the next chapter, but we have a soul. and that soul finds its home with God. Okay? So the structure of the human person. We don't, when the Shema says that we love the Lord our God with all our heart, with all our soul, and with all our might, it's taken the three basic fundamental aspects of our daily life, okay? With all our heart, with all our soul, with all our might, and combines those things so that we're not a fragmented person before God, we're a whole person. And so we can see that in ourselves. Also, when God is missing, we can see it in others. Just go to a funeral where the loved one that's laid in the casket is not a believer. And maybe half the room is not believers. You can see it everywhere. You can smell it. You can taste it. It's everywhere. Okay? So we are able to understand the general revelation of God in the human condition when God is missing from that life. So it is not dependent upon being a believer to understand this. You cannot be a believer and just observe their life or observe your own life and begin to gather some sense of what general revelation means in the human person. The other thing, right before the revelation of nature section, it says, in daily living, we may suppress the sense of moral conditionedness, but it reemerges in the boundaries situations of life, such as times of solitude or crisis. What do I mean by that? There are times in our everyday living, we don't give these things the attention it deserves. Okay? We're not integrated. And this is for believer and non-believer. Okay? But when does it become apparent? And Kant says, when? In times of solitude, when you're all alone, it becomes pretty apparent. That's why when people find themselves in a place of solitude and that moves to a place of hopelessness, they don't mind taking their life because they've lost everything of meaning and purpose. Everything that we know to be, what we know to be God, has totally become devoided in their life, okay? But they begin to know it at that point. Now, when you begin to sense something, but you have no one in your life that can help you with that, then that's even worse despair. To have a sense of yourself and have no one in your life to help you with it. That's a lot of people in the world. Yeah. And if you manage to get to someone and it's a doctor, they're going to give you a pill.
Yeah. Let's mask it. Let's make you not think those things.
So it's poverty of relationship that we really begin to understand. And for a lot of people in solitude and in crisis, they begin to realize that their life is devoid of a relationship that's meaningful. And the primary relationship of meaning is the other that we are drawn to. Even if you're in this open to the world theology where I can do anything, eventually you have to realize that deep inside, I'm drawn to something beyond myself, that I've built a world where I can't even get out. And that's the truth for a lot of people. So, that was revelation in the human person, revelation in nature. The biblical writers, we've talked about this, that there is revelation in nature that we see in the orderliness of things, and we take the account of creation in Genesis, and we see nothing but chaos in the beginning, and God brings perfect order. And we know that God's pleased with it, at least, because at the end of every day he says, this is good. So there's a goodness to the world, okay, that is established in God, and we can see that in nature. I saw a video the other day, and it was chimpanzees sitting in the zoo, and the young chimpanzee was throwing rocks at the visitors, watching them in the cage, and the mama turns him over her lap and spanks him like a,
Like the person you were supposed to.
yeah. And I'm thinking, well, maybe we are like that. Maybe we did come from a monkey. It was so great. And I wonder if she learned that from watching somebody in the zoo. So you got to put all that together. Anyway, it was interesting.
No matter what,
But-
revelation in nature.
yeah. There was great revelation there. But we find that there's an observable graciousness of God in creation, and we find it with the interaction of animals that would normally not interact. We find it in the way that even in the natural world, there's a level of conservation that occurs that
Well, the ocean.
we've learned from.
Who told it to only come so far?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When we look at those poetic,
Wave just coming over in and knocking us out forever.
yeah. So we have that, and it's important that we know how to see those things. And then he goes on to mention how just simply caring for each other is not the natural state of a sinful person. So there's a graciousness that occurs. I wrote an article in seminary. We were arguing or had to make an argument against this idea of survival of the fittest. Is that really a law of nature? And so I had to spend a lot of time extra biblically reading and all. But the conclusion I finally came to debunk the idea of the survival of the fittest is, if that's true, and if that's rooted in scientific fact, that that's the way it should be in order for the species to survive, then why do we treat cancer patients?
Yeah.
Why do we treat anybody? And then if people are diagnosed with certain things, why do we allow them to marry? When you begin to add all that up, we treat them because it's the right thing to do. They're human beings. We allow people to marry, even though there may not be a good idea for them to marry, because they have the right to that as a human being, to experience love and all of those various aspects of life. So we do those things, and it is an expression of what I believe to be the graciousness of God. Okay. Now, like anything else, that can get pushed beyond limits. And so we take what is a good thing, and we do this whole openness to the world idea, and we make it into something else. And because it has been something that God has often, we've seen God in it, and we even read that it's his stamp of approval, we pushed it beyond the limits and still expect God to do the same thing. Okay. So we get lost in this whole idea of God's revelation in nature and in the graciousness and love and mercy. Okay. But when we push beyond those limits, we can't expect God to go with us because he set the limits. Like you were saying about the waves, he sets the limits for everything. Okay. Because without him, what would happen to us? All right. The limit of general revelation is this. General revelation functions only as a testimony to the presence of God, who is in reality standing both behind and within the world. So, general revelation allows us to point to, okay, but it doesn't allow us to always see him active in the midst of what is happening. Okay, general revelation is something that is observable over a period of time, but quite often God is behaving in a way that is immediate and specific to a place and a time. So general revelation would never show us that. Okay, general revelation does not show us when the cancer patient is about to go under the knife and they do a final scan and they find out all the cancer's gone. You can't find that in general revelation, but you find it that God is working in the midst of things, okay, that is quite special and unique. Okay, so we would all say, yeah, that's the answer to prayer. And And a radiologist would say, how did I miss this so badly? You know, unable to see, but we can see. But the revelation's the same. Because general revelation is limited in scope, it is also limited in its result and consequently in its potential use. And that is more for us than it is for the non-believer. It doesn't always satisfy. General revelation does not offer us a firm foundation on which to build a systematic delineation of the nature of God. Meaning, if I'm just observing God in nature, or in the logical processes of the world, can I begin to uncover the nature and character of God in that? Maybe some, but would you know the extent of it as it relates to offering His Son Jesus on behalf of our salvation?
We would only see his wonderful creative self
Yeah,
in that.
yeah, which
Can't-
is a sliver.
Yeah, it's just, yeah, you can't see the whole.
So it's important. You may crack the door open, but something else has got to push it open. Okay. The limited use of this concept is evidence in the Bible. Even most definitive scriptural texts, which I read earlier in Revelation, general revelation plays a circumscribed role. Paul's main purpose is not to set forth the thesis that creation testifies to the reality of God. Rather, his point is that sinful humans suppress even the testimony heralded by natural creation. So what is, and Gretz is right, he's not trying to do anything other than show the sinfulness of man. That whole opening chapter of Romans is to nail down our sinfulness so that Paul can get to the good stuff of talking about our redemption. So even for Paul, last paragraph, therefore, the concept of general revelation is subject to limitations. He invokes it to highlight human sin and divine judgment. The apostle does not appeal to general revelation to provide a sure foundation for a theological edifice. Meaning what? Means that it's only good for really one thing. There's God's there. He's revealed himself.
Creator.
And because you're a sinner, you can't see it. So just get used to the fact. Okay? Now once you do believe, it's amazing how you can see God everywhere. Mainly in a lot of people. You know? You can just, there's a sense of him. Wow. All right, God is our origin. So let's just park on that a little bit. We appreciate the fact that Scripture tells us that God has created us. Okay? But where do we find the theological significance of saying that our origin is in God? Which Scripture would you go to say that I have my beginning in God?
Genesis.
When he creates Adam,
Okay. When he creates Adam, what does he do?
Brings life into him from the dirt.
Breathes life into him. Okay. So we have this identity early on in Scripture, primitive writing, that is able to reveal to us that a proper understanding of being human is to understand that we are who we are simply because God has offered himself to us in this unique way. So in chapter 1, the uniqueness is what? Let us make man in our image. That is the uniqueness. That's finding our origin in God. And in chapter 2, it's breathing into him and finding our origin there. Okay? So either passage, either tradition, most scholars believe they've written by different authors there, but they're saying the same thing, just from a different direction. That we find everything about our life, we find in God. And when we break down that relationship, or when we fail to give it attention, it becomes like any other relationship. And so that was, if we want to get off this bent a little bit and look at it biblically and theologically, that was Satan's big plan. Diminish the relationship by any means necessary. because that's where God has exercised his full character and nature in the human being. They bear his image, okay? And the human being finds its full identity and purpose in that relationship. If I can do something to tear that apart, then God will lose and they'll lose. And so how do you do that? You break that down by creating suspicion.
Did
It's
he?
just suspicion.
Did he really
Yeah.
say?
Did you really say
Did
that?
you
Did he?
really
You
think
sure you know? You sure he didn't lie
that?
to you? So we find, that this origin idea is important, because if we begin once to believe that our origin is not in God, that relationship doesn't have much worth. Because at that point, God's just going to be what God's going to be, and God's going to do what God's going to do, and there's nothing I can do about it. And so I don't know. We can't know his graciousness. We can't know his love. We can't know his care. We can't know any of those things without that. And of course, the beauty of Genesis is that we find that even when we failed and the relationship is broken, God doesn't allow it to affect his relationship with us. He still provides.
He's protecting.
And that just really had to tick Satan off. God is that kind of God, which he knew, but
I think the way Passion, what was the crazy guy's name?
oh yeah.
The way he
Crazy
projected.
guy, that narrows it down to
The
about
one
10,000
who
people.
wrote the movie Passion. What was his name of the movie Passion?
Jim Caviezel
No, how he did it. But remember that one scene
with Satan.
when he finally saw that he thought he won and he didn't,
Yeah.
and
yeah.
he didn't. It's like he had,
the Christ.
yes, yeah, I can't think of that crazy guy.
Yeah.
Who was the crazy guy that directed it? Anyhow,
Mel
to me,
Mel Gibson.
That's the one. To me, that's.
I
To
didn't
me,
know he was crazy.
Yes, but to me, that scene was just.
I keep
that.
waiting for the sequel. Yeah, that's right.
That scene was that.
Yeah, he depicts a lot of that, I think, perfectly.
Perfect. Yes, it was perfect.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to get back to this openness to the world idea. Under God as our origin, as the concept of general revelation suggests, not only the natural world, but our existence as humans point toward God. We've talked about that. Okay, our biological adaptability and plasticity, which give rise to openness to the world, imply that we are infinitely dependent. I talked about that a while ago. Okay, so this openness to the world idea is that we can just do whatever we want to in our life because we have the ability to do it. It's that we are infinitely dependent and directed beyond the world, but especially our world that we've created. For our ultimate identity, we are dependent on a transcendent reality, which is the divine creator. We can only find meaning beyond this brokenness that we continue to harbor. When viewed theologically, openness to the world signifies our fundamental human creatureliness. The more we delve into ourselves, the more we realize just how created we are, how finite we are is a better way to say that. In this way, the modern concept returns to us the traditional theological affirmation of God as the origin of humankind. It also takes us back to the conclusion that humans are God's creatures. Those two things are important. Because we are dependent on a transcendent reality, the ultimate origin of humankind lies beyond the world. Stated theologically, that's our origin is in God. So that's the point that he's making. That's where we look to. We might get, no, we won't. Lord.
We got too many pages.
We might not get to we might have to wait till next week to get to the meat of all of this. Okay, existential significance. Christian theology declares that our origin as human lies in God, our creator. One dimension of this assertion is its assertion is the existential significance, its meaning for our actual existence. What does it mean? It does no good to theorize about a life with God. Might as well be theorizing about living on Mars, which I guess my grandkids will be able to do if they want to. I don't know. It's a crazy world we live in. Yeah. So God in theory is no good. God in practice, that's what we're looking for, and that's what God's looking for. Okay. God is the ground of human existence. So God as the ground of a personal existence, the existential thing that God is the ground of personal existence, has in view our individual personal existence. At the end of that paragraph, we are simply because, in accordance with his free graciousness and gracious freedom, God has bestowed existence on us. Why do you exist? Because God allows it to.
He says so.
Yeah,
And he's the one who takes his breath back and decides when we're not going to exist anymore.
that's right.
And you'll never find that answer in the world.
Uh-uh.
Anywhere. You'll search and search and search.
They just can't get it.
Yeah.
No, that's
Too easy.
part of this openness to the world. We try to recreate it. So we know that we need something beyond ourselves, but everything that we create that is beyond us is broken and fragmented and unreliable and it doesn't work. So, and I'll use an example, this whole transsexual business that we have going on where people are having sex change operations and that kind of thing. And I understand, I appreciate even the inward turmoil and strife that some people are going through. Okay. And I appreciate it. I don't understand it, but I can certainly appreciate that kind of hurt and confusion and searching and that kind of thing. But to go to the point of recreating yourself in order to find the answer for that, to me, just says that they've totally looked in the wrong place. Everyone around them is encouraging them to not look in the right place. That's just the way of our world today. If you're looking for answers, by all means, don't look to the church. Don't look to faith. Don't look to the Bible. That's not going to satisfy your openness to the world mentality about your life. It's not going to. You're going to find restrictions. You're going to find guidance that is beyond what you're looking for. That's kind of what's vocalized there. And the whole time you're avoiding the very one that has said, no, I'm allowing you to be anyway. So why not look to me? But talking about being a dinosaur, it's an old-fashioned idea today in America anyway. And so we have to...
And then they don't tell you that they go and do that and they have the highest rates of suicide and misery and everything else because it's not working for them.
I saw a terrible statistic, but I don't know why it's not talked about more, but you take a segment, and I think it was girls, and it's not a very big sample. There's not that many.
Yeah, but
several
still
thousand.
it's in their group.
But it's in
in
that
their
group,
group.
and they did the same socioeconomic and everything, and the rate is like 400% more than it is, and the rate for people that aren't is still tragically high. So it's all elevated.
It's like they are committing genocide by not allowing these children
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
to have to propagate.
Right.
Yeah.
That is genocide.
Yeah.
What kind of genocide is this?
I agree with you.
Yeah, it's certainly lostness for sure.
Yeah. So the significance is that we exist at the behest of God. He allows it, but we also exist for him. Okay. And in evangelical terms, we've always said that the reason why we exist is worship. And if you've ever listened to Michael Heiser, who's now passed away, but Michael Heiser would say, I would think that would be the most boring heaven I could enter. He says,
That one right there, it will let you know quick. You don't want the idea of nothing but music or sitting on the cloud all the
I used to
time.
think
Yeah.
yeah,
It's like
Yeah.
give him the beautiful crystal seas and the creation and a job. Yeah,
yeah. So Heiser's point is that when I want to be able to work the way my body was built to work. If I'm an integrated whole, I'm going to get a new one. I want to be able to work. I want to be able to sweat. I want to be able to be the perfect human being, not a replacement that has no other purpose other than to do what God already knows in my heart I am doing in every little thing that I do. So we exist on the behest of God. He allows it, but also we exist for Him, and in whatever way that we determine. That's a whole nother discussion that we'll probably get to way back here.
Yeah, this big old book, there's plenty of room to talk about it.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the eschatology and last things and all of that, I'm certain. So those are two very important ways, and also that all of that is we exist at the behest of God, and we exist for the pleasure of God, all in glory to Him. And I didn't want to let that pass because that has become my new focus. Or my new way of stating what I've always tried to say is that it's the glory we bring God is what we're really after. And I don't have to have a posture. I think worship is a posture of things. But the glory I can bring the Father is right here, right now.
Yeah, that's not the only way.
Yeah. And I got to thinking about my school days. The professors that always talked about heaven was going to be nothing but worship was always my worship professors. So
That's how their idea of
that's
heaven.
how they. I think that's their worldview,
Yeah,
their Christian
that's their
worldview.
idea.
Yeah,
Well, that's from Revelation, where they just stand there singing holy, holy,
Yeah.
holy.
That's those angels' job. You know, we're gonna have that beautiful supper table, and we're sitting there eating and enjoying it, everybody, and let them angels just keep singing, and we'll come join you every now and then.
Well, my eschatology does. There is a moment where we are enjoying that, but then once the new heaven and the new earth arrives,
Time to get to work.
I think it's going to be different. Anyway, also we approach God existentially as a universal Father, and we've tried to differentiate those things too. But we understand God to be the Father of all creation because everything that exists is His. That's a natural understanding, and to be able to call Him Father is one way that the Bible does that. But also there is a specialness to God as our Father through our relationship to Him in Christ Jesus. Okay? So in both instances, the designation is proper, but so is the delineation, obviously. But the world, I think, when they hear, I think most people, when they hear the word God as Father, they think about Him being the Father of all humanity. And so when we speak of often when we talk of world religions, we'll speak that all of them are God's children. And it's a way of making peace. I know it's semantics more than anything else, but there's this universal fatherhood that exists, but that there are also within that universe of humanity, as Jesus pointed out with the Pharisees, some of you have another father. And so we have to be able to accept what Jesus is saying and understand that there are those that follow Satan, unbeknownst to them, that's what they're doing. So only our true Father is able to make that delineation in a person's life. That's what Jesus came to do. And to offer salvation, but it wasn't just for those who believed in God as the Father. The Jews would have been ones. They weren't even all believers in that way, is what Jesus is pointing out. So the word has universal implications, but it doesn't mean that it's universally true. That there are those that have chosen to not live as God would have them live. And so it goes beyond just creation. It goes beyond your motivation in how you live. And that's a part of this existential idea of God. We don't just get to claim Him like we would claim, there's a set of 12 soda glasses over here I got at the gas station. I pumped 100 gallons, so now I get to claim them as mine. We don't get to do that with God, where I've lived enough life to where I've earned the right, to call it. That's not how it works. So we We're conscious of the delineation in our thinking and in the way we speak to people about it. Because, yeah, not everybody is a child of God by any means. Okay?
That conversation came up just the other day. Just some of us with different faiths sitting at the table. And a certain faith was, it's forgiveness and love, because somebody was there was saying sinfulness and hell, and it's like, yes, he is God, but the individual has to acknowledge that.
That's right.
Forgiveness. You're just not automatically forgiven because you were born a child of God.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, let's look at the history.
Yeah.
I mean, he elected all of Abraham's descendants, and they all wound up being apostate
Yeah.
and worshiping other gods. So election doesn't get you there. What gets you there? Well, what does get you there?
Yeah.
You know?
Your decision to what you're gonna do with Jesus.
That's right. That's right. It's going to be the relationship you have with him.
Yeah. Whosoever will.
Yeah. And that has been clearly defined and cemented in Christ Jesus. There's nowhere else to go. You thought you could run wild, but now Jesus has come and you're backed into a corner. You gotta do something.
And boy, there gonna be some open eyes when that trumpet sounds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There gonna be some open eyes.
The other thing about God is that he gets to decide what's human and what's not, because he's the creator. All right, so this is quickly changing in our world, people. What is human and what is not. Okay?
That's scary.
Yeah. I mean, I can remember watching the crazy Man and Machine movies and thinking, and that's crazy science fiction.
Science
And
fiction,
now here we
yeah.
are.
Everything we've ever seen
Yeah.
in futuristic movies.
And see,
come
that will
through.
gain its own definition. And there's other things, that we try to determine for ourselves what's going to be naturally human. Okay? And the Bible's telling us none of this is naturally human. This is a grant that God has offered. Okay? And he gets to decide. So that when humanity pushes the limit and goes beyond that limit, he doesn't have to recognize that as human anymore. So we've gone beyond his limit. And the amazing part about it is we have a free will that guarantees, free will guarantees that God will not be alone in the universe, because we get to choose to be with him. Now he could have been, I say alone. God in his fullness was not alone, but God in his fullness also chose this. Okay? And so we're allowed to be a part of it. That in itself ought to just bring you to your knees in humility and humbleness before him. And so this is what this section is largely about. That the source of our value is found in God. Okay? Whether or not we know him, it doesn't matter. Jesus said, blessings rain on who? The righteous and the unrighteous. So God is busy being God, doesn't matter. But the source of value, regardless if you recognize it or not, always comes from God. There's no way to establish that in a fallen, broken, sinful creation. Imagine if you had to find your source of value in the midst. It would be very difficult to do. Now, not impossible to do. You can find value, but it won't reach the height and meaning that it does with God. I say that from a theological point of view. I'm not from an argumentative point of view, which if my son's watching this, he says, Dad, you're taking the easy way out, but I'm taking the easy way out. Okay, well, we got to go.
It is easy. It's simple.
Well, he's the thinker in the bunch, for sure. Any comments or questions about any of that kind of ran across your brain while we were talking?
Good stuff.
I enjoy it. I'm going to go now for anybody that's watching. How do I turn this off? I guess I can just hit the X. Oh, yeah. There we go.